Hello, Kaushik. Really good to have you here. And Kaushik, I'm going to dive right into this and focus on the recently written paper that Inakshi was referring to. So your paper, The Ground Beneath Our Feet, talks about big tech becoming bigger and implications it could have on inequality and the fact that antitrust laws are kind of were made in a different era for a different era, and they don't quite apply today, and they had different axioms, and hence can't really control for this. And what are your views on this, and if you can elaborate more?
Aditi, thank you very much. Also, Inakshi, thank you for the generous comments. For me, this is an interaction with Asia Society after a long time. It's a pleasure to be back. Let me jump right away into the question that Aditi puts on the table, but I'm going to back up and come into this. It is a giant leap technologically that we've got into over the last 30, 40 years, which is changing the nature of the world, the interaction, as she mentioned just now, the platforms, changing the nature of the way in which antitrust law applies. But before I get into this, I do want to point out that when technological advance takes place, if we can go over the hump, it's all very good because you've got new technology. There are 1,000 different things that you can do. But when the change takes place, a major change like we are going through now, it is a turmoil for the global economy because there are many hidden assumptions that no one fully understands that get exposed by this. And I back up to the Industrial Revolution. When I look at the current situation, to me, my mind always drifts back to the Industrial Revolution, roughly say from 1750 to 1850-60. We come out at the end of it much better off. Yes, there are special challenges that have been thrown into us by the Industrial Revolution, but the world came out in many ways better. To take one simple indicator, Angus Madison's calculations, the world used to grow at the rate of 0.3% per annum before the Industrial Revolution. After 100 years of turmoil, after that 0.3% had changed to 2.1%. The world is growing 7 times faster than what it was used to. We usually take the period of the Industrial Revolution as therefore a glorious change for us, but we forget that the early years, not just a few years, but decades, 50, 60 years, the world was in turmoil. The skies were being darkened. We did not understand the soot and the pollution we were throwing into the skies. Children were working 12 hours, 14 hours a day, collapsing at the end of the day. There are reports. I used to, once upon a time, work a lot on child labor, and that period is a major period of my interest, special interest. We came through all that because of, I feel, 2 reasons, and I'm hoping that in the conversation we'll get into a little bit of that. One is radical policy changes. And I'll come to some of the things that we may now need in the context of antitrust law that you brought up. Radical policy changes, let me give you one example. You know, what seems to us like normal today happened during the Industrial Revolution, and some of those seem just out of this world radical. Income tax, part and parcel of modern life. When it was brought in for the first time in 1842, people were screaming, what is this policy that is being brought in? Gradually you realize that you have to do that. There has to be some pooling of funds in the hands of the government which you are using for things. So that which looks completely normal to us was novel over there, and a variety of other laws there may be occasion to get into. That's one. The other thing that allowed us to tide over the Industrial Revolution is the novelty of thinkers looking at the world and trying to understand the new world that we were entering. The most prominent character over there is Adam Smith, who comes out with his dramatic book, 1776, The Wealth of Nations. And if you get interested, of course, these are things that I work on all the time. It's a new understanding of the same reality that we are living in He understands that. Let me bring one more point, which I do want to bring in the context of modern platforms, Amazon, and antitrust law. One of the things that Adam Smith wrote about, which we all know, is the invisible hand. Namely, and Adam Smith's idea was that when you look at the world and the order, of course there is also disorder, but there is order. People are producing goods that they will not consume, someone else will consume. People are producing food which they will not eat, someone else will eat. How's all this order coming around? Someone who looks at it will think, is there a dictator at the top who's dictating and people are doing their jobs? Hobbesian Leviathan, is that the factor driving this order? Adam Smith says no. There's the invisible hand of the market. Individuals going about their daily chores, satisfying their own interests through trade and business is bringing about this order. The invisible hand is something which you can't quite model, but that is something which is driving the economy. It's these novel thinkers from Adam Smith to me, 100 years later, 98 years later, Leon Walras is the dramatic period of looking at the economy and trying to understand. Let's step into today. The change that we are going through is very similar. Technology, which ultimately, if we can put it to good use and bring order to society, is a dramatic improvement in technology. And what is that doing right now? It's like the early years of the Industrial Revolution. It's changing a variety of things, causing polarization of society. Labor, the demand for labor is sloping off. And one very interesting thing has happened with the arrival of these platforms like Amazon, which in fact economists are not too well positioned to understand. You know, in economics, some of the biggest breakthroughs have come from people who are outside of economics. Because once you're in the discipline, your brain gets trained to think in a particular way. Very often when you come from outside, you can bring in fresh perspective, and that has happened in the past. Today, look at the digital platform like Amazon. Pause for a moment and think about it. In Adam Smith's world, the ones who are bringing the sellers and the buyers together is no one. It's the invisible hand. You go to the market, you find someone who wants to buy the good that you're trying to sell, you get together through the invisible hand. What is Amazon today? What is Uber today? It is the invisible hand, which is a profit-making body that is bringing the buyers and the sellers together. Far from being invisible, is a visible platform that's a profit-making body. This is throwing up challenges of a kind that we have not seen before. And you're right that in the US there's a lot of activism about antitrust law that let us make our antitrust laws work better, because inequality is increasing in a dramatic way. These platforms are getting huge amounts of profits, so we need our antitrust law to work better. But the antitrust law, which was started in, well, you take the start as the Sherman Act, 1890, the antitrust laws, it was for another world. And I feel we have to look for very different policies, and we may get into that. But I want to bring in one more thing about the changing landscape of world and policy if you want to go into. But one more thing I want to point out is what the COVID-19 pandemic did. These are things that happen so subtly that we are not even aware of. There's a lot of writings about the Industrial Revolution. As these new technologies were coming in, machines for making cloth, weaving, etc., coming into play, it would take 30, 40, 50 years for those technologies to be used, because learning takes a lot of time. So even after the machine and the technology is available, the patents have been given, the intellectual property established, people don't know how to use it. Think for a moment of what the COVID-19 pandemic did. Because we live in the middle of this, we are not even aware. I remember in the first days when I would be called upon to give a lecture using Zoom or WebEx, I would be fumbling, the students would be fumbling, but we've got used to this. I mean, one lamentable part of this new world is I keep saying that you can't get away from your office because Zoom chases you wherever you are. This is a part and parcel of our life. The technology has seeped into usage much more rapidly than has happened in the past. And all this is causing political turmoil, social turmoil, and I feel we have to think of very different radical policies to take on the challenge that we are getting from the rise of new technology.
Thank you for that. And I think the next question has a lot to do with what you just said. What should the government do? And where does tax come into this? Because, whenever there's inequality, we find there's the tax man. So where does this all fit in?
Okay, then let me go. This is a nice way to segue into where I was holding back. What kinds of policies? Let me first of all look at antitrust law. Antitrust law, US is the pioneer, starting with the 1890s. And antitrust laws, very interestingly, have been used very strategically in the United States. The Sherman Act comes in, Clayton Act after that. All this is to prevent firms from colluding to raise prices, which makes consumers suffer. But US is a pragmatic country. By 1918, they realized that you want to use antitrust law to break up collusion, but to protect your consumers. So if there are firms that are producing for the global economy, you may not want to apply these antitrust laws because it's people in other countries who get exploited. So the Webb-Pomerene Act came in, saying that if you can show that you're producing primarily for other countries, then some of these provisions do not apply. You can collude, you can push up prices. It's a Machiavellian policy, but later on we've seen similar policies adopted in other countries. Japan most prominently, after World War II, went in for similar policies. But there are also very good policies. Later on, the Robinson-Patman Act. So the US has a slew of good policies, especially for their domestic economy. But now there's a lot of disquiet that some of these platforms are earning mega profits. What do you do about that? And the platforms are creating a problem which there are lots of American writers writing, where it's not just the consumers who are suffering, but even the retail sellers, the small retail sellers who have to get onto the platform to sell their product. They need protection. It's not just the consumers. And there are a whole lot of people like Cass Sunstein, Suresh Naidu, a bunch of people who have been writing very prominently on this. Lina Khan, who's working in the American government, have been writing. See, here is the problem. Platforms which make mega profits, like, say, Amazon, we do know that the Amazon for the first 7 years was making a lot of loss. Why? Because it was trying to get up a market share. It was cutting into. And it was calculating right that once we've got a disproportionate amount of the market share, people have to come onto Amazon to trade, we can begin to expand our margin. And now, of course, they are making mega profits. This strategy has led a lot of people to say we need antitrust law, but they forget one thing. Even in the early American antitrust law, it is pointed out that there are some industries where the size is the strength. If you break it up, that big industry, into 1,000 small firms, the whole advantage of that industry goes, and there's no way of denying. It's pointless to put on your radical hat and say, break it all up. You can't do that. Some of them are natural monopolies, and the word natural monopoly comes up very early in American antitrust law. Think of the big platforms. Yes, you can break it up into 2, 3, not very much more. The whole advantage of a platform is you get onto one site and you search very quickly for prices and products and buy. If Uber, the reason one uses Uber, I'm even here in Mumbai, I'm using Uber every now and then, unlike in the olden days when you go out into the street and start looking for taxis or hailing cars, stopping, bargaining, now you book it on Uber. It's a platform where the ones who want to sell and the ones who want to buy are all on that platform. It becomes a great advantage. If you break up Uber into 100 little platforms, you'll be searching on each one for different prices. You're back again to the old world. These platforms are in many ways natural monopolies. My view, and I know that over here I don't stand with the majority view in the United States, because majority, even radical view, I do believe in taxation. I'll come into that we have a responsibility for Allowing markets to function, I think the profit motive is important, but I do believe that there should be a proper severe taxation to do some transfers, but you let the profit motive, but you also make some transfers. That's another matter. Let me stay with this on these digital platforms. What do? You can't just break it up, use the old antitrust law. So you have to think of novel policies. Here there are 2-3 different suggestions, some which will sound extremely radical right now, but I think it is important to bring these to the table and not be dogmatic, because if you are dogmatic, as soon as a policy strikes you, you say, let's go with that, you can make huge mistakes. You have to pull back, you have to have discussions. Let's take a look at this. My view is yes, you need to use the antitrust law better wherever you can. And once again, Suresh Naidu, Glenn Weil and others in the United States are pointing out that a lot of the antitrust laws have been used historically to protect consumers. We should think of the other side of monopoly, which is monopsony, and also think of labor being protected by using antitrust law. All that is true. But you can't cut up these platforms into 1,000 platforms. What do? You see, these platforms would not be a problem. They're mega profits if the profits were going into lots of different pockets. So one way of handling this, which we touched base on, and I do believe, this is not quite my field, but I should mention this is work that I've been doing with one of my students, Aviv Kaspi, and a law professor, Robert Hockett at Cornell. We've been doing together. We've been exploring the idea that if you have a dispersed shareholding rule, no one can have more than 1% of the share of these mega platforms. Ultimately, you don't want to do that in the beginning. First 14 years, first 20 years, like antitrust, like a patent law, you allow few to hold on to this because you do need the profits for these major experiments. You don't want to dampen that. Then you go for a dispersed shareholding law, which has lots of people. Yes, it's one firm, but the profits are going into many pockets. I'm so sorry. This is the eternal fear of today's world. And yeah, it's in fact invariably turns out to be the same person. So there's another policy which, for an audience like this, I can talk about. We have written about it, but it is a policy which can be dangerously misused as well. Absolutely biggest platforms, you may have to worry a little bit about whether it can be left into a profit-making sector. Not immediately, but in the long run. And let me explain this to you. You know, a firm which is the gatekeeper of the economy. If you want to survive, let us say that one platform becomes the platform on to which everybody has to get onto. In order to be able to function, to buy, sell, trade, everything you have to get onto that platform. You have to think whether that can be left as a profit maximizing. One thing is very dispersed shareholding is a possibility, and whether at all it can be left as a profit-making body. There's one striking example which most people don't realize. One of the most important firms or organizations where everybody has to get onto that to survive in the modern economy is the central bank that issues money. Everybody needs money. So the central bank, if this was a profit-making body and everybody needs to get hold of money to buy, sell, then the profit-making body is a corporation that is the gatekeeper to the entire modern economy. What people forget is when the Bank of England was started, 1694, it was a profit-making body. There were 1,200 shareholders who owned the Bank of England. And people, they were making profit, they were issuing money, profit was being made. Gradually, when the turmoil of the Industrial Revolution is starting, there are murmurs that yes, we want the private sector. We do want entrepreneurship. But do we want the central bank to be a profit-making body? It took a long time. Finally, it was decided, no, you can't let that happen. The central bank became not a nationalized state-run entity, but an autonomous entity with lots of rights. We have to think of outside of the box for certain kinds of, if a platform becomes the gatekeeper for everyone, you may have to think of radical policies like this. And I do again warn you that many radical policies can backfire massively if it's done wrongly. So these are things which have to be debated endlessly. You asked about taxation directly, so let me tell you my view about taxation. Again, I do want to stress that nowadays, especially, thinking is so crass and lumped together. If you suggest one radical policy, everything is pulled together. We must not do that. And I am, as an economist, very aware that the profit motive, entrepreneurship is extremely important for a country, for the world. But taxation also plays a role. And one kind of injustice in today's society that troubles me, and on this I go along with, fortunately, what gives me a little bit of hope is there are American billionaires who will point out that we've done very well by the system, but we do also need changes in the system which will make it a more equitable society. Take one thing which used to strike me. For years, my mother, who passed away in 2010, my father before that, I would regularly go to Calcutta, to my parents' home. They lived in a reasonably prosperous area, not very prosperous, but a reasonably prosperous area. I would go and visit them. I would go for a morning walk. Morning walk is describing my habits wrongly, a late morning walk. I would go from there into a neighboring area, 5 minutes walk, very sort of gilded special area of Calcutta. I would walk there. And it would occasionally strike me that, people say that if you try hard, no matter where you start from, you can make it. That is true, provided you're above a certain platform. And this thought would strike me that someone who is being born in a slum in Calcutta with absolutely nothing, they don't really stand a chance. Yes, one of them may make it by fluke, but they don't stand a chance. The initial disadvantage is so great. So what conservative economists will tell you that, income, money is what people have made through their hard work. A lot of it is. But a lot of the inequality in our lives is inequality at birth. Some people are born shockingly poor with nothing. Some people are born shockingly wealthy. And that is not hard work. Babies are not hardworking and not hardworking. That is simply that the way society is constructed, they are fated into that. So I do believe that while we want markets to flourish, entrepreneurship to flourish, we also want a decent taxation system which transfers money from the rich to the poor. I've just actually published a book which is called Reason to be Happy. It is about individuals and the power of reasoning, where I talk at length about nature of taxation, which is not going to dampen incentives too much because you can't do that. At the same time, we'll cut out some of the gross inequalities of life. And over here I would quote Paul Samuelson, who was probably the richest economist because his textbook went through the roof, the sales of that. Paul Samuelson said that I've made a lot of money, but I've also advocated for a policy which is against my self-interest, which is a greater redistribution of the income inequalities that prevail in the United States.
Kaushik, that was very well explained. Kaushik, but still I wanted to talk about what you said about the shareholding. I come from the world of finance, so do some people that are sitting here. And all these companies that we're referring to, and an example you gave that was Amazon, they're public companies. Anyone can buy their stock. A lot of people have become millionaires because they bought their stock in advance. A lot of their customers bought their stock and grew with them because they believe in it. They have cult followings, these companies. So, it's not only certain rich people becoming richer. Yet, I agree with you that there could be a law to distribute the shareholding like they have in India with the banks. The RBI doesn't allow any one person to own more than 26% of a bank after a certain point. And they don't have that. And that's actually a very, a foresight that the RBI had. Could that have happen in America, and where are we on that? Would there be a cap? A cap in a way that doesn't discourage the entrepreneur or new entrepreneurs to come?
Yeah, so a very good question. And there's a parallel on this to do with intellectual property. To do with intellectual property when you're creating new products, technology, pharmaceutical products, variety of things. Again, a lot of people will jump and say that, look, these should be made available to everyone. But these are extremely expensive research, which leads to these breakthroughs. So you have to give people who are doing this a certain period of reaping the benefits of this. I do believe in that. And there are laws on certain products that 14 years you have the rights and you're going to get profits. Some will have 20 years, you have the right to this. What you're suggesting, and this is what we have informally discussed this, Hockett, Caspi, and I, and with some other groups we have had discussions, that's exactly the kind of thing that we want. There is a lot of risk-taking when you're starting a big firm. And there you want a window where you may want to get a disproportionate amount of profit after all that risk-taking, so give it a 14-year window. After that, have a law saying that you have to disperse that so that it gets widespread. So whether this can ever happen in America, I don't know. This sort of takes me back a little bit to what we were talking about earlier, the Industrial Revolution. If we didn't manage some of the changes that we did manage, radical changes, the child labor laws which now seem so normal, you don't want a child to be working at all. If you're less than 14 years old, you don't want to be working at all. And in America, when the law came that there's a 10-hour limit, children should, so not in America, in UK, 10-hour limit, that children can't work more than 10 hours. 8-year-old kids are not allowed to work more than 10 hours. That time it looked like a radical policy, and there were people writing, it's well documented, that the character of our working classes will be ruined unless they are learned to work 8-10 hours right from childhood. So it is now what looks normal is very radical. So I feel some of these policies will need to be thought through. If we don't, there is a risk that Inakshi touched on, which is what we've been writing about. I and a co-author of mine called Jorgen Weibul, we are doing some work, we call it the dinosaur risk. And the dinosaur risk is, since you referred to that, it's the following. And there are species who have gone extinct. The dinosaur, some 65 million years ago, vanished from the face of the earth. No reason to believe that we human beings will continue endlessly. It's a brutal thought, but it's an honest thought that could happen. The one difference between the dinosaurs and us is that when the bad times come, the dinosaurs don't have the capacity to pause and say, is there something we are doing wrong that we need to change? Whereas we human beings have the capacity to pause and say that on climate we are beginning to do that we need to behave differently from the way we are doing. And the Industrial Revolution was a point also where we thought through many radical changes. I feel this is once again a time like that dinosaur moment with our thinking beings that we pause and say that let's take stock of the global economy and changes. And later, if you want, I do want to go into supply chains a little bit, which is causing new problems, forcing us to think in novel ways about global regulation. But I'll hold that for a while.
So back to the big tech, and you talked about inequality starting from the time you're born. I feel in the world of AI, it's only going to be so many people who understand it, and these LLM models, etc., are huge, and they take a lot of money to even build. So it's going to become even more acute. And I'm only talking about the people who have the AI in hand and can exploit it, and the very few of those, and who can afford it, and who will become big. And AI itself will, of course, bring more inequality in the short term, because jobs, etc., will be taken, and then there'll be a sort of a period before people can adjust to either understanding how to apply AI or becoming AI experts in coding, etc., themselves. So what are your views on AI and this problem? Because it's only going to exacerbate it, in my view.
Yeah, indeed. And in ways in which it affects our life directly. You mentioned my game theory class at Cornell. I usually make my exams open book, and not just open book, open laptop. So students come in the room, sit with laptops. I just tell them, don't talk to anyone, but consult anything, do Wikipedia search and do it. I've done it till this year. But with ChatGPT, now I'm beginning to worry if I can allow that, because yes, they are not talking to someone else, but if they keep giving the questions to ChatGPT, they're going to get answers. And apparently now you can tell ChatGPT to make the answer a bit novel and not a standard one, so I won't be able to find out. So it's beginning to affect our everyday lives. And you're right, that this is going to change the landscape. And labor is something that we can go into. It's going to change the landscape of labor, already changing it. You know, one of the hopes and also worries is the changing landscape of labor. But you see, Aditi, one thing which is for me worrying is when something novel comes about, you almost get a society of two-tiered society. The few who understand it properly and the masses who don't understand. And only thing I worry, what you said, is that for a period this will cause inequality to increase. It's not completely sure that it will go the other way unless we think through very carefully. One historic example, the arrival of Europeans on American soil. This is the Spaniards, Italians, etc., the discovery of America. There are these beautiful accounts that these are more sophisticated people from Europe coming. They had other kinds of cultures, the native people of America, but the Europeans had one kind of sophistication. And when conceptually the mind is differently programmed, some beautiful examples with the Cherokee Indians. A group of British arrival over with the Cherokee Indians tells them that, look, we want to buy your land. And the Cherokee Indians don't understand that, because for them, buying and selling of land is not something they ever do. Land is collectively owned, so they can't quite understand even what this is, buying your land. In fact, the first sentences, these are very well recorded, the Cherokees are saying that, no, our land is your land. Because for them, it is all collective. The Europeans realized that if you want to have it on contract with their laws, they said, no, we will give you a small payment. Cherokees said, that's fine. They do an agreement. Cherokees don't even understand what that agreement is. And the story goes that after the sale of land, next week the Cherokees are back as usual, tilling and using the land. When the Europeans come in and say, what, you've sold the land. What are you doing over here? They don't understand it. You talk to your older relatives, and I don't have to talk to my older relatives, I have to talk to myself about new technology. When I talk to my children, they are so much faster at this, and there are so many things I don't understand. Only thing which nowadays occasionally gives me sense of joy is when I tell my son or daughter in their early 40s, late 30s about something on technology. They were explaining it to me slowly. When my grandson, who is 8, came and said, why are you doing it so slowly, and started moving things and much faster than them also. So it's really moving to a small group that understands this very well. Once again, we have to pause, stop, and think in terms of regulations in advance, so that by the time this technology is seeping through, we don't have masses of people facing the fate of the Native Americans who were wiped out by one group that came with a skill which was different from others. I'm once again advertising some technical work. I'm doing 2 works I will mention to you. These are technically written, mathematically written papers. One is work I'm doing right now. I'm very excited, actually, sitting in IIT. I've been going back and forth with my co-author, Jorgen Weibul, on how in game theoretic situations, the arrival of new knowledge can, in rare situations, backfire on everybody. You do worse by the arrival of new knowledge, and we are both in the field of knowledge, so we want to make it very clear that knowledge is important. It's the central feature of the world. But we must not turn a blind eye to that. There are some ways certain knowledge can come in, which backfires on society altogether, and you need new laws to, in anticipation, protect against that. Another paper which I've written with 2 co-authors, Sudipta Sarangi, in Virginia Tech and Ajit Mishra and Bath University is some of these taxations, which if you impose it on a single firm, say a tech firm or a pharmaceutical firm, can damage incentive in a big way. But this is the technical point, but if you impose it on a group of firms, say that these 10 firms will have a taxation which is grouped on them, there are some very interesting game theoretic moves between them that can be triggered off, but this is not for a discussion in this kind of an audience. You have to be in a smaller group with me using the blackboard, but these are works that I've done, I can't get into here. Yeah.
Just one more comment and question, and then one general question after that. You said that you'll have to anticipate and bring laws up where AI is concerned and other new technologies. The problem is that the lawmakers need to understand. And the lawmakers need to be educated and need to be experts to understand what's going to happen and anticipate. And that itself is a challenge. Who knows so much is going to go into lawmaking? They all want to go make money and go into industry. So that itself is probably a challenge.
A huge challenge, and here I would say, by the way, at Cornell we've just started, I and Bob Hockett, who I mentioned, a new center for law and economics, precisely for this reason. And Bob Hockett is a phenomenal mind, bringing in the law side into this, and I try to take economics and think in terms of this. Here I should say one thing about India, which gives me hope, but I also do worry. I mean, the quality of discussion, debate in India often can be extremely high. But we do need that space. It does worry me that populism can drown these things out. And it's very easy to think that, it is all intuition. Anyone can do it. But whether it be law, whether it be economics, whether it be engineering, part of it is intuition. Anyone can do it. Part of it is science. It's techniques where you can go wrong. Let me give you one example from economics which fascinates me. In certain parts of economics like inflation control, monetary policy, for 3 years I worked mainly on fiscal policy, but I was very active here. Part of that is no one knows 100% for sure. I don't get immediately angry if something is going wrong on fiscal policy, monetary policy, because these are very complicated things. You use part of it is intuition, part of it is data. But there are some parts of economics which are like engineering science. One is auction design. There are techniques, there are mathematical techniques written up of how you design auctions, which are just like building a bridge. Americans, when they do auctions, it's very, very well done. You bring in a whole lot of mathematical economists to do the design. India's there. And India has this capacity because the sad part of India is our education system was very dichotomous, and this is a long-run failure. That the higher education is at a spectacular good level. A lot of people don't get any education. This was the duality of India. I used to always say in my early years, in the 80s, living in Delhi and teaching, when I would go for a conference to America or Europe, as an Indian, it's very few countries where you're not from Europe or America, but feel completely at home and comfortable in these conferences. India was one of them because of the quality of higher education and the level of interaction. So that advantage is there. But we have to pause and think that we ourselves may not have the capacity. The lawmaker may not have the capacity. The politician may not have the capacity. You need to bring in the best minds. India has that. We have to use that, and I hope that we will do it. Great opportunities ahead if we do.
With that, maybe the last question to you, Kaushik, is just your view on the global economy, India, China, and what is going on right now.
Yeah. Thank you. Before getting into the specifics, India, China, etc., I want to do a little bit of speculation about the global economy ahead of us, which includes, of course, for India and China. What will happen? Will we come out of this digital revolution, the AI revolution, with better growth? Don't know for sure. I'm not sure. I am a skeptic on most things. I like to have doubts that things can go either way. And on this, who knows? But here is a little bit of a glimmer of hope I do feel is that we've done it before. Again, I gave you the example of the Industrial Revolution, before which growth rate, global growth used to be 0.3% per annum. After the Industrial Revolution, 2.1% per annum. So growth jumps 7 times. The world growth rate now, right now, this year is 2.4%. That's the World Bank estimate. 2.4% is the global growth. But we are going through difficult times. The global growth had got on to something like 3% per annum. If it goes 7 times after the digital revolution, that will mean global growth is at a level of 21% per annum, which of course sounds ridiculous. That can never happen. If before the Industrial Revolution, when the world was growing at 0.3%, you told people that the world could grow at 2.1%, people would say that's ridiculous. But also there is the challenge of the environment. Can the world, let alone 21%, can we go back to 3%, 4%, 5%, go up to that 6%? Is it possible? I do feel it is possible. Let me give you the optimistic scenario and then some of the dangers. The environmental part that people talk about, that the days of high growth are gone because the world can't tolerate growth of this kind, stems from one important mistake, which we, at least economists, should not make. Growth up to now means more cars, more homes. That's the way growth has taken place. But GDP, the national income, is not just houses, cars, yachts, and bridges. Better health is a part of GDP. If you go to an evening concert, if there's a very good concert in Mumbai, 1,000 rupee tickets, 1,000 people go for it, buy this, then GDP has gone up by that much because 1,000 people, each one of them has got 1,000 rupees worth of value in them. So GDP consists not just of cars, phones, bridges and hotels, but good health, good education, listening to good music. GDP is anything that we value. My expectation is if we come out of this current scenario, period of turmoil, and given that advances in technology are all potentially hugely beneficial, our GDP's composition is going to change dramatically. A disproportionate amount of it is going to be health. Our life expectancy could go up. Illnesses that we worry about could go down dramatically. Each of these things have value. So the growth of the better health is a big component of GDP. Consumption of music, consumption of literature, consumption of philosophy, things which give us pleasure, and we will also need the mental capacity to be able to take these kinds of things in. So GDP could see a bounce back in growth and doubling of growth rate, but the content of that GDP is going to be very different. We need to talk and write about this much more. Immediate run. Where are we headed? Opportunities for India, China, other countries. I feel the 2 sectors which will determine a lot of where we are. Let me actually, before getting into these 2 sectors, just mention one thing which is a window of opportunity, not so much for China, but for India and a host of other countries, is with the rise in AI, digital technology, and the demand for labor declining, countries which have a high labor cost, they have a special problem that the demand for their labor is going down. They have to contend with that. China is at a level where that is beginning to happen. India still has a window, I think, of 5 to 10 years, where the Indian labor, if we can do our policies right, there will be global demand for Indian labor. And though India's youth unemployment right now is extremely high, we can make corrections for that. And another 5, 10 years, this route is available for us. This route is available for Bangladesh, for Vietnam, for Mexico, whole lot of emerging economies, by still continuing to use their labor and grow. But this window is going to gradually shut down, and we have to think of other ways to keep up. 2 sectors, this is complete speculation, my view, and I may be wrong, there's scope for discussion. I feel the 2 sectors which are going to be crucial for the economies to be in the front line are education and health. I feel these two sectors will see a disproportionate amount of GDP. The national income is going to be not the capital of bridges and airports, but human capital, of creative human capital. And the health sector is going to grow. And there are very novel ways in which a country can begin to get its space within this and capture for the world. India right now is in a sweet spot politically because of the tensions between the United States and China. With this, India is in a spot where it's an advantage. India has moderately good relations with both of them. They feel comfortable. India has room for that. But I do worry that India's politics, if it continues to get polarized, then some of the fundamental surrounding features of the economy will get damaged and we will give up on this opportunity which is there in front of us. On the health and education sector, what should we do? The education sector, first of all, is we need education, the kind of education to become modern education, good quality education, creative education, because standard work is going to be taken away. Computers, AI will take over the standard work. It'll be the creative work which will be with us, and we need to jump into this space. One historical example of a country that has done very well by making use of this intellectual space is South Korea. South Korea, if you go back to 1950s, had a per capita income close to India's, very similar. By the 1990s, South Korea's per capita income was 22 times India's per capita income, had shot up. The sector where they stressed many other things that were happening, the chai balls, there are also occasionally bad politics leads to good policies. Unfortunately, that is the truth in life. But there were also, the education sector in Korea was extremely important. You know, if you look at intellectual property per capita, Korea and Israel were among the front runners in the world, and there is no surprise it is being expected that Korea is going to overtake Japan in terms of per capita income. Though Japan is again stirring over the last 1 or 2 years, there's going to be a neck-to-neck try. But the Korean education sector is a phenomenal sector. They say that there are teachers in Korea who earn incomes like jazz popular rock musicians because they are such superstars, because education is so highly valued. I feel India has to realize that the education sector, for which the space for creative ideas, for contested ideas has to be opened up. I hope India does well. The other one is health. With the differences in prices about Western countries and also Eastern countries like Japan, for emerging economies that begin to develop their health sector well, and India has done well. I mean, our pharmaceutical sector is quite exemplary. This sector done well can begin to occupy a space which is going to be a global driver. The demand for this is going to go up. On education, I have another suggestion, which when I was in government, since then I've been talking. There will be, I think, increasing flow of people going to other countries to get education. And India, if it can use that space by becoming a global hub of education where people come from other countries and to get educated, India stands a chance. I'll give one more historical example. If you go back to the 1915, Argentina was among the 10 richest countries in the world. For 40 years, it beat China. For 40 years, it had grown very, very rapidly. And there were even American newspapers saying that it's a foregone conclusion that Argentina is going to overtake United States in terms of per capita income. But by 1930-35, it was clear. US was sweeping ahead. Argentina had stumbled. What caused that? You know, I mean, you can never be sure. You're analyzing history. Argentina went through a phase of hyper-nationalism. It does worry me. Hyper-nationalism can lead to trade barriers, all kinds of moves which stem from that. It went into that. And people say that that became a disadvantage, whereas US at that point of time was opening up. People coming in from other countries, from Germany, a large number, from elsewhere. And by the 1960s, 68, Indians were coming in, Indians going into the United States, very different from Argentina. But another sector which I think is crucial, the higher education sector gave the US an advantage of a kind that we don't talk about enough. I feel America's real power is not the hard power, but the soft power that came from the universities and the institutes of higher education, creative education, which led it to the completely as a front-runner economy, was that higher education space. We need to study these more. Higher education will be of a different kind. Health sector will be of a different kind. But if these two sectors the country can do well, the country can indeed get into the front-runner space. Let me stop with that.
With that, thank you very much. And thank you, Inakshi, for giving me the opportunity. And do we have any time for questions? So maybe we can open it up for questions.
Hi, may I start, please? Kaushik, thank you very much for a very enlightening talk. You alluded to this in little bits, but a question to you, in India, and I don't know the rest of the world, but we're seeing a concept of jobless growth for a little while now. And even currently, while the GDP seems to be faring well or projected well, I don't think we're seeing the same trajectory on actual jobs. This is despite or irrespective of technology. Now, with the advent of technology, as you describe it, how do you see the future of jobs? And I'm particularly interested in India perspective. And the second related question to this is what seems to be a radical idea, at least from an Indian context, of universal basic income. You see that becoming imperative going forward because of jobless growth. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. One advantage or disadvantage of a light glare is I can't see whether you're asking the question angrily or happily. I can't read your face. But objectively, I'm treating it as that. These are very good questions. Let me jump in. The jobless growth. So I feel work is going to shrink. As I'm saying, even countries like India, we've probably got a 10-year opportunity. The wages are still low by international standards. But as India grows and the jobs vanish more and more, work is going to shrink. Suppose, in fact, the early writers, Thomas More and others, when they would talk of utopia, they would talk of a world where people have to work only for 4 hours a day. And the rest of the time, music, literature, whatever you want, you can do. We are heading towards that world, but that worries us. But for one important reason, and once again, this connects with some of the matters that Aditi was bringing up on policy. If jobs vanish, so that robots are doing all the work, at one level it does not matter. Because yes, you're sitting down, someone is bringing your food, someone is doing everything else. The reason why that worries us is our current structure is, if jobs vanish, all the income will go into the pockets of those who own the robots, those who have the intellectual property on them. Workers will have nothing else. Otherwise, if it's no work, but robots are doing everything for us, that's not so worrying if there is a redistribution that takes place, which means that you sit back, but you've got the income to buy the things that you want. And this is actually a research area that I'm getting into right now. This is my own research area. I am very excited. I feel there are novel opportunities here. The meaning of work is going to change. When menial work is taken away from us, the way economists thought of work is something for which you have to be paid to work. That is going to go down. So work is going to be a totally different kind of thing. It's going to be work at that time. And what do I mean by this? Even historically, some academics will tell you, Paul Samuelson, since I quoted him earlier, said that what pleases me most is I've been paid a huge salary for not having to work. What he meant is research for him was not work. He would do it anyway because there's so much pleasure in it. He got paid for it. About Socrates, it is believed, Xenophon wrote about this, that Socrates enjoyed teaching so much that far from students having to pay Socrates, Socrates would be willing to pay to people to come and sit down and listen to him. So work was not Socrates working to teach, but students working to sit down quietly and listening to Socrates. What is going to happen a little bit is, say, art, painting. Yes, at one level it is work. If you're producing thousands of art pieces and selling, that is work. But Picasso was not painting because of work, because it was an obsession. Van Gogh was painting because of an obsession. Van Gogh earned nothing. Picasso earned a huge amount. What will happen when menial work gets taken away is pleasurable activities which I can sing, but people like to listen to my singing more than I like. Then I'll sing a bit more and earn from that. And someone who likes to, say, paint, may paint more and earn from that. So the nature of work is going to change. We will need a very different kind of economics to understand that. The second part of your question on universal basic income, I have some broad sympathy with that, that you do need a floor. But even better than that, so if you're not going to do what I suggest is even better, I would go with an universal basic income for some of the same reasons that I'm giving. Once machines are doing everything, there is no reason why the owners of the machine should get all the income. Even the workers who have been unemployed, they should have a basic right. But my preference for that basic right is not a universal basic income, but a universal basic share. So in the country, we were earlier talking about dispersed shareholding within a corporation. I believe that there should be some amount of share ownership at the level of the nation, and in an ideal world at the level of the world, where people own a part of the share. They don't have to work, but they earn the income that comes from the shares, the profits being generated, the incomes from those shares are going to these people. And there is important writing, for instance, in America at MIT, Marty Weitzman wrote a book a long time ago called The Shared Economy. That time it was an exercise in mathematical economics, but people are beginning to write that a fraction of the global profit, if the entire income is profit, because labor is gone, a share of that profit should be owned by all the people, and they earn income from that share, is the kind of thing that we have to think about. I had begun by talking of novel policies. These are all novel policies. They have negative aspects to it, positive aspects. We have to put them on the table, have open discussions, and see what is possible.
A great thought-provoking discussion. Since we talked about the digital economy and really today data is the new gold, how, and most of the input for monopolies like Amazon, Google, all of them is the data, and the data that we give and the data that they create and all the models that go behind. And how does the whole concept of who owns the data privacy, and the government or the other regulators coming in to our private lives along with these monopolies or these large digital players, how is that going to really play out in how we also evolve as a society and how the businesses will grow and take advantage or use the data in different ways?
Yeah. This is a nice question because it fits in with what I was saying. Certain things which we don't even think of them in traditional society as a product with a value, when the world changes, that becomes a product with a value. Data is one of them. In the olden days, yes, we get a little bit of data. Sitting on the roof, I watch my neighbors' buying habits from the window. I can see and I can try to sell something to my neighbor. That was the kind of data that we were using. I remember growing up in North Calcutta, houses cheek by jowl. It's amazing the amount of information that we had of one another just by peering through the windows. That was the kind of data, and some people would use that. But that data would become such an important source of money, which even the individuals who are generating the data don't realize. I don't fully understand. I mean, I give out data very easily, and my children will come and say that, this is a product that you're being careless about that someone else is picking up. So we need regulations, and I can't even pretend to be an expert on this. We need very novel regulations because this is a new product that is coming into the market. Some people are going to make very big profits out of that. And you can see that, I can give you other analogs of that, where we didn't even earlier realize that that is a product with a price. Art is a very good example. Think of, in contemporary world, as soon as you're an artist whose art is being valued, you can make mega profits. I mean, the biggest artists make crazy amounts of profits. But think of the Indians who were earlier doing the miniature paintings. They were sitting and doing these paintings, didn't even realize that there is a market value for this. Yes, some people will like it'll be on, but if they had put in their signatures and said that I have a copyright to this, and then if someone's art became very popular and big, you would make huge amounts of profit out of that. That became a product later on. The other example which fascinates me, in my early days, cricket and the cricket players. Some of you will remember they would be working in offices and playing cricket. Because, you know, cricket doesn't give you enough money. You're on the Indian team, but still you work in an office. Now it's mega money because you realize that this cricket player, the crowds that come, they get value out of this. And part of this, large part of this is because of the player. Platforms have been created whereby they can get the profit. The data is a new kind of product which has come in. People who are realizing the value are beginning to cash in on this very quickly, collecting the data, capitalizing it. This is a big topic. People are beginning to regulate so that we should not wake up 10 years later realizing that, look, 4 or 5 firms have bought up all the important data. You need regulation in place for that. But the detailed regulation, I'm just not up to the mark to comment on that.
Good evening, sir. My name is Shardul Vikram Singh. And as you mentioned populism and hyper-nationalism, my question is a little bit political. So once you were the chief economic advisor, you were able to bring out so much, like 27 crores people out of the poverty. Now, right now, so I come from a region where Ram Mandir has been built. Somebody questioned my because I was not rejoicing with it. So what is gonna do with the level of bigotry in the society to impact the entrepreneurial capacity of the Indian, which will be going to work in the like MSMEs sector and like small companies, and what will be the and how the policies the government can tackle it, because like future governments can tackle it. So that is my basic question.
Thank you very much. One thing I should tell you, that people do a very easy association, and whether you like a government or dislike a government, good and bad we very quickly label, and this I can say because the getting out of poverty that happened during that period, so many complicated things drive it, is that you don't quite know who gets the credit for it. There's also luck, there is the global situation, but as I was saying, economics is one of those strange subjects. Lots of drivers for which no one can take the benefit, no one gets the blame. But there's also a lot of thinking involved. And I have to say that there was some gratification that there were times when I was CA that we would sit down with the top politicians, detailed policies being worked out on some of these matters. And I felt very good because I would get a hearing on how you do. Auction design, I've sat down and done detailed discussions on how to design a good auction. And there, if you make a mistake, it's going to bomb on the country. So yes, I don't want to directly associate good outcomes with everything to do with policies, but that is there. What about politics worries me, I'll tell you, is that going back to a long time, almost 100 years, Karl Polanyi pointed out that the economists pretend as if the economy is an entity in itself, but the economy is embedded in politics, in society, in institutions. So even if you run your economy reasonably, if things are going wrong around it, the economy can begin to falter. John Maynard Keynes will tell you, one indicator in India which is doing badly, not receiving enough attention because it doesn't affect us directly. Private investment and savings has been going down. Major driver of growth in the long run. This correlation with savings and investment and growth is not that like a stock market, it will happen next week. Usually it's a couple of years. If it goes down for a time, it's going to adversely affect growth. Why are these things going down? Some people will directly blame fiscal policy wrong, monetary policy wrong. I don't think so. It's very complicated. But John Maynard Keynes pointed out that savings and investment is also a large part of it is the trust, confidence. These things matter, very difficult to delineate. What is happening in politics is it's become so divisive, is that these surrounding factors are beginning to adversely affect. I just hope that we will have the wisdom to pause back and not fight at every point. pause back, think through and say that we will damage the economy. Just the fact that we've grown this year at 7.6% does not mean that we will grow faster, get back to where we were, which is 8.5%. May not happen unless we get these surrounding features right. I just hope that we will have the wisdom to sit back and think, but I have to leave it at that.
A question right here.
Hi. Very interesting. Thank you very much. I'm Pragni Kapadia. I'm a lawyer and I do tech stuff. So it's really interesting to see, listen to your talk. But we can never keep up with tech, which is what we've been saying. So how do you think some of your gaming theory, or how can you apply that to actually translating it into laws which work? Because it's always a challenge. You're always 10 steps behind. The time they put out the law, something else has changed. So how do you deal with that? And is that something you're going to do at this new institute that you start?
So there's no 100%, since you're looking into the future, technology is growing in leaps and bounds. And there are few people who understand this fully. The ones who are drafting the law, who are enforcing the law also don't fully understand this. This is a challenge. No way are we 100% sure that we will meet that challenge. And here an example I'm thinking of is, money creation and inflation. Now we understand much better. But what we forget is you don't have to go far back into history. We did not understand fully how the basics of money creation and control, and you have to go back to, in fact, it's 101 years. 1923, the German hyperinflation, crazy level of inflation. The figures are, people used to take sackloads of money to buy small things the way inflation went over a year. This was the changing nature of the economy, but the policy makers were not up to the mark. They did not realize, and some of this is no one's fault, they didn't realize how it can go out of hand. Today we understand inflation much better. It can go to 6, 7, 10%, which is very bad. But still, the Reserve Bank knows how to control, how to lace it in. But as technology changes, people keep talking about when currency becomes fully digital. Paper currency is gone, coins gone. Currency is nothing but a record being kept on a computer. It'll be very different kinds of central bank policy, Reserve Bank policy. Will we get it right? No, not 100% sure. Our hope is that if we marshal the best minds to do a speculative thinking into the future and draft laws, we will be able to block out some of the worst effects because we've taken the laws into account. It's not 100% sure, but this is one of the most challenging fields. What makes economics exciting to me, the exciting is the wrong word because this is such a dangerous game, but because this kind of economics where you're trying to understand technology at Cornell now, the interface between computer science and economics is huge. We've got one of the biggest economics and computer science interface going on. It is to understand as technology is growing in leaps and bounds, to bring in economic policy making along with that to take advanced blocking measures. But it is an open-ended terrain we are doing. There is a risk of the dinosaur risk. Fingers crossed that we will not fall into that trap.
Yes, in the course of conversation in the early stages, you had mentioned that you'd be talking about global supply chain changes. My question is twofold. In fact, first is that immediately post-COVID, there are a lot of thinking about redistribution of the hubs, supply chain hubs, so that turmoil in one particular region does not have so much of adverse effect on it, number one. Number two, you had also mentioned that this labor market, which is probably going to be flourishing only for 5 to 6 years, it could even be shorter because of primarily advancement in robotics and automation. And in fact, so therefore, even the manufacturing hubs are also likely to shift. So therefore, this will again have some sort of effect on the global supply chain. And in fact, it's already happening. For example, the companies like Mercedes are already heavily into automation and are shifting their hubs from this, from the old manufacturing places. So that is what I wanted to ask you about impact.
I'm glad.
Thank you.
I'm glad you brought in the supply chain. I've been doing work on that. See, the supply chain is changing the nature of manufacturing and markets in a very interesting way, which we don't fully understand. Go back to the old world, the world that was for economists, people who have done economics, was created for us a model of that in 1838. Augustin Cournot created a model that the automobile industry is like 100 firms producing cars. And then you try to understand what prices will be. Think of a supply chain economy. There may be 100 firms in the automobile industry, but it's not that 100 firms are each producing a full car. One is producing the tires, one is producing the chips, and they are linked through the world. One is doing it in Taiwan, one is doing it in India, one is doing it in South Africa, and the product goes through this whole chain for the final product to come out. That's the supply chain. In the olden days, when there were 100 firms in the automobile industry, if one firm stopped producing, 1% of production would crash. Prices would go up a little bit. Now, when 100 firms, each producing a critical component, if one firm closes down, it won't be 1% of those 100 firms, 1% closing down, it'll be the industry coming to a halt. And that's why, what you pointed out just now, countries are in America, there's talking of friendshoring, that you produce in friendly countries. The supply chains should run through friendly countries so that they don't get interrupted. What is also happening is this is once again the intertwining with politics, which we better understand. And we are seeing this with the Ukraine crisis and the Middle Eastern crisis, is that the supply chain is an instrument of warfare of a kind that we had not anticipated earlier. If the situation gets very bad, if you're a producer of a vital component of a global product, chips, let us say, you can tomorrow tell the world and the countries you don't like, stop doing what you're doing, otherwise we'll stop the supply of chips altogether. That's like a bomb on the economy. The global economy is going to go stumbling. What do you do about that? One is the kind of thing that is being talked about, friendshoring and all. The other, which is very difficult at this point to talk about because the world is so fractured, you need better global regulations which cuts across countries. So the way we thought of a constitution for the whole country, you need minimal constitutions for the world that, look, you can do many things, but you can't cut off a supply chain. If you're not giving that guarantee, we will not allow the product to go through you. These kinds of global contracts are needed. At this point of time, it seems hopeless in the middle of the Ukraine situation in the Middle East. At the same time, it is not as hopeless as it may appear. After all, India, as big a country as this, we did adopt a constitution for the whole country. United States in the late 18th century, when it was talking in terms of a constitution, it looked hopeless. So many paths, so many interests, but it did manage to do that. So it is possible, and we have to think in terms of with a supply chain world, that otherwise one more route to the dinosaur risk is that there will be a warfare, not of bombs, of a sudden disruption, which is going to throw the global economy into a turmoil. And your labor part is roughly the same kind of answer I gave. You're right, it may come upon us sooner, but we have to be ready with the kinds of things that I was talking about.
Kaushik, thank you so much. This has been really interesting and invigorating. I have 2 points to make. One is just a comment about your potential students. Please do not stop the laptop programs that you do, because there are softwares like Turnitin which can figure out if the guy is using ChatGPT or not, right? So don't make them go through mugging up everything and coming and talking about that. More importantly, if you wear your policy hat, you've been a policymaker yourself. We've seen over the last 10 years, there are certain programs or softwares or technology innovations, specifically cryptocurrencies. We didn't refer to that in conversation today, but it's something which has come, it went out, seems to be coming back again. I'm just talking about Bitcoin and some of the others, right? What is your view on that? Because there are countries like Venezuela that actually embraced it completely. There are countries like India that banned it completely. So we are seeing very different reaction from central banks on whether to adopt, accept, or completely reject the concept of cryptocurrencies. But it seems like as time goes by, it is a wave that will find a way to come in. So what are your thoughts on that as a policymaker?
Yeah. First of all, thank you for the first comment also, because my instinct is, I keep telling them that I want to make my questions tricky enough that no matter what you consult, you'll have to think. So I don't want to stop that. Now you're assuring me it's possible not to stop that option for them. On cryptocurrency, you don't want is small entities on their own to create bitcoins and run them. But my expectation is, in the long run, it is going to be that kind of currency, digital cryptocurrency. What you will need regulation is that it's central bank handled. So it's going to be basically, in the end, what is it but information? That 6 months ago I did this work, now I want to buy apples. Nowadays we keep the information by keeping notes in my pocket or money in the bank. But in that world, it's going to be just these computer jottings, codes that will be a record kept. So I feel in the long run that is unavoidable. And if we take the view that we block that, Scandinavian countries, Venezuela, you point out, there are others, Scandinavian countries which are making moves in that direction. It's going to come. So my feeling is we have to be prepared for that. But it ultimately, my expectation is it's going to be a central bank. So you will need very novel forms of central banking. The central bank keeps that information. Problems will be of other kinds. This I'm being told by people who understand this kind of digital part. The information is going to be so heavy on these computers that even water and all the demands is going to be phenomenal. So we may have to park these in places where you have easy water supply, where the information is being parked in these computers. But that's the way the world is going to go. With that, the nature of a central bank policy we will have to think through. I don't know where it'll go. Let me give you, from another world, an example of money, which we don't think about till we pause and think. We treat money supply now as completely central bank controlled. But there are simple ways in which even we control money supply. Tiny bits, but there are others who do more of this. An example is, in airlines, when you fly, very often there'll be that pouch saying that if you're not going to use these coins, your coins in your pocket, please give it. We will give it out to charity. What most people don't realize, that if you're putting in coins which you would really not use, you're creating money supply. You're doing what the central bank does. So yes, it may go into charity, but it's also going to slightly bump up prices in the world. You're creating money. So money has these very, very subtle sides to it. And even conventional money, because of my interest in mathematical economics, in the 1980s, 90s, early 80s, there was a whole slew of mathematical economists trying to write up the meaning of money and in mathematical structures so complicated that remains an unfulfilled agenda in economics. And now with the arrival of cryptocurrency, there are people, I've got a colleague, Eshwar Prasad, whose book you should read. He understands this very well. He's saying that this is another world we are entering with very, very novel steps that we have to take. But we are going to go that route, I feel pretty sure.
I have a simple question. Professor Basu, people like us benefit from reading your articles and books because we know English. And I also read Hindi all the time, and I don't read articles by you or Pranab Bardhan or Abhijit Banerjee or Amartya Sen in Hindi newspapers. And since populism is the leitmotif, I wonder if you people discuss this issue, how stuff spoken by you and written by you can reach a wider audience in regional languages in our country, so that more people understand what you're talking about. Of course, policy making would be done in big rooms, but this is something that I think about, and I wonder what you think about it.
I think very strongly and very emotionally about it. I would love to do what you're suggesting. I do occasionally in Bengali, because it's easy for me. Hindi, someone else will have to translate for me. I can then read and see if it's to my taste. But I would love to do that. So if you can give me a Hindi contact, I would immediately explore that and write regularly. I mean, I enjoy writing. Yeah. AI will do it for me. Yeah, AI will. So we don't need a translator. Yeah.
AI doesn't do it well enough.
Yeah. So yeah, I would have people helping me to touch that up. Yeah.